A silver Kia Soul is observed stopped at a red light when a cyclist can be seen approaching from behind. It appears that a quick word was muttered before the cyclist appears to throw a punch at the passenger of the car. This would set into motion a deadly set of circumstances, which would end up with a man laying dead on the street just a minute after this footage. We take you back to the start of how this event occurred. It was a perfect night in the fall of 2020 in Wisconsin. Many people were out at the bars and restaurants enjoying the lovely weather. One such person would be 54-year-old Jason Cleereman, who was out with his wife Evangeline Cleereman. Jason was a veteran and a respected attorney specializing in immigration. He had helped many individuals and families from various cultural backgrounds find a home in the United States. Jason and his wife had a home in the area of Milwaukee called Walker Square, surrounded by working-class families. They were often involved in local community events and became well known to everyone around them as a lovely and friendly couple. Also out on this perfect night in a different part of town would be Theodore Edgecombe. Theodore had been in and out of trouble with the law, but appeared to be trying to improve himself for his kids. A year prior, in 2019, he had been charged with felony battery, which can carry a prison term of 3.5 years up to a maximum of 15 years. Despite having committed a severe crime, he was allowed out on bail of a mere $250, on the condition he didn't commit any further crimes and he was not allowed to possess any weapons. As 2020 would roll around, the world started descending into chaos, with the pandemic beginning and racial tensions at an all-time high due to the George Floyd situation and the ensuing case with Kyle Rittenhouse. Only 3 months later after these events, on the 22nd of September 2020, Theodore Edgecombe would agree to get sushi for his daughter and himself so they could enjoy a daddy-daughter night watching TV. They would order from their favorite local sushi restaurant, and Theodore would hop on his bicycle to go and pick up the food. When he arrived, the food wasn't quite ready, so he would stop at a nearby frozen yogurt place where he would consider getting some dessert, but ultimately decided against it. He would head back toward the sushi restaurant when he would encounter Jason Cleereman and his wife Evangeline heading west on Brady Street. They had just returned from a night at the bar with friends, with Jason having enjoyed many drinks and Evangeline offering to be the designated driver. Given that it was a perfect evening, the couple had their windows down to enjoy the fresh air. At this point, Evangeline had claimed that Theodore on his bicycle had swerved into the lane of traffic they were traveling in, almost causing their vehicle to strike him. Jason had stuck his head out the window, making the remark, "What the heck?" to the cyclist. The cyclist, Theodore Edgecombe, would refute this claim, saying it was in fact Evangeline in the car who had swerved in his direction, knocking him off his bike and into a parked car. He would also claim that Jason had called him the N-word, followed by some further expletives. While the story differed depending on who you asked, what was clear was the next set of circumstances. Theodore can be seen pulling up to the passenger side of the Kia, where he would ask Jason, "Were you talking to me?" When Jason replied yes, Theodore would throw a hard punch, striking Jason, knocking his glasses off, sending them flying to the driver's side of the car, and causing drops of blood to splatter on the passenger door. The cyclist would promptly ride off from the scene, and Jason would advise his wife to go after him. Jason was heavily intoxicated, so it's not clear at this point what he was aiming to do by having his wife follow the cyclist. Regardless, they would catch back up to him, where Jason would get out to have words with the guy who had just assaulted him. As he would approach the man, Evangeline would follow closely behind in the vehicle. It was at this point the man would produce a gun, and before Jason's wife could yell out to warn him of the danger, A gunshot would ring out across the street. Jason would fall to the ground, with the cyclist fleeing the scene immediately. After a minute or two sitting in the vehicle in shock, members of the public would pull up alongside her vehicle and call 911. Evangeline would eventually muster the courage to make her way out and check on her fallen husband. She would check if he was still breathing and check his pulse. Sadly, there seemed to be no signs of life from Jason. She would reach into his back pocket and remove his wallet and wait for officers to arrive. Officers eventually arrived at the 1700 block of North Holton Street, where they would encounter Evangeline distraught and in shock. Witnesses would be located at the scene, including Jeffrey Parr, who would recount to an officer what he saw.
Sir, did you see what happened? Okay. Do you have an ID with you? It's inmates, Let me give that back to you. So what happened?
So from what I've seen is that the people that were in the car were chasing the man that was on the bike.
Jason would be located at the top of a stairway that would lead down to Water Street below them. He would be pronounced dead at the scene with a single gunshot wound to the head. Inside of Jason's pockets would be located a pocket knife with a retractable blade, and near to his body was discovered a 9mm shell casing, assumed to be from the murder weapon. The Kia vehicle that had been left parked nearby to the body showed signs in the interior of blood splatter, which, when the footage was recovered later by police, was deemed to be from the punch thrown at Jason. Detectives at this point had no idea who could have carried out this brutal crime, and pictures were circulated on social media dubbing the person as the Brady Street Killer. An autopsy would be carried out where forensic pathologist Dr. Philip Kelly would recover a 9mm bullet from Mr. Cleereman's head. The entry wound had been just above the left eyebrow with no exit wound. Lacerations were also observed around Jason's right eye, consistent with injuries sustained from being punched. Toxicology reports would show that Jason had trace amounts of THC in his system and a high blood alcohol content. Investigators would now move to try and identify who the offender was. And luckily for them, the area was littered with video cameras that captured the whole event. Not only was the homicide caught on camera, but footage of the suspect leading up to the event was caught on many different cameras and angles. The killer had left the murder scene, taking his bike down the stairs and riding west on Water Street, passing Humboldt Street, and entering Caesar Park before he would disappear out of view. Investigators would turn to the bicycle that the suspect had been riding. Images were shared throughout the police department, and one of the bicycle mechanics who fixed the police bikes at the precinct would recognize the model of bike. It was identified as a GMC Denali bicycle, a popular consumer model often purchased from Walmart. When images of the bike and footage of the suspect were shared on social media, it wasn't long before family members would come forward and identify Theodore Edgecombe as the man seen on the video. Police would race to his house, located on North Dousman Street, but would find absolutely no sign of Theodore. They would search the house, and they would find the GMC Denali bicycle in the basement, along with a black Ruger SR9 9mm handgun, which had 10 unspent bullets in the magazine and a live round in the chamber. The gun would be sent off for forensic testing, with detectives certain that it would prove to be the murder weapon. They had a suspect, they just didn't know where he was. Months and months would pass by, with Theodore seemingly disappearing off the earth. That is, until a chance encounter with law enforcement. Almost 6 months after the murder, police would pull over a car in Hardin County, Kentucky that was speeding. The officer would approach the vehicle and ask him why he was wanted in Wisconsin, and Theodore would claim he had no idea why. Not a moment after those words had left his mouth, He tried to correct himself by saying that police had him mixed up with someone else. But they weren't buying it, and he would be arrested for possession of marijuana, along with having an open container of alcohol in the vehicle. When his ID was confirmed as Theodore Edgecombe, he would also be slapped with a providing false identification to law enforcement officer charge. He would be extradited to Wisconsin to face charges for the brutal murder of Jason Cleereman. The charges against him were reckless first-degree homicide with a dangerous weapon and a felony count of bail jumping, since he was still on probation from his previous offense. Reckless first-degree homicide can carry a prison term up to 60 years, and felony bail jumping can carry a term of up to 6 years. Then came a twist in the case. Theodore would plead not guilty to the reckless first-degree homicide charge, claiming he acted in self-defense, and Jason was in fact the aggressor in the situation. This would add a layer of complexity to the case, as Mr. Edgecombe's lawyer would now have to prove that his client could not have escaped the situation, or was in imminent danger, which required the use of deadly force. The argument of self-defense would be even more difficult to prove if the defendant had provoked the situation. With the Black Lives Matter protests still fresh in the public's memory, the claim that Jason Cleereman had used a racial slur against Theodore would also come into question. Jason's wife was a woman of color herself, and friends and family had noted that he had never used any terms like this around them ever. He was also colorblind and dedicated his life to helping people from many different cultural backgrounds create a life, regardless of their skin color or social standing. The trial would be set, but before it had even started, drama would erupt after it was discovered that several of the jurors had their identities leaked on live streams of early proceedings. Judge David Borowski would replace the jurors, and the trial would finally begin on Friday, April the 8th, 2022.
Do you see my hand? Do you see my whole hand? Or do you only see the side that I'm showing to you? For over almost 1.5 years, there's only been one side of this story that has been advanced by the government, by the media. But today, members of the jury, this week, you will now hear the other side of the story. There's been many interviews by alleged victims in this case, but there's one victim who has not said one word yet, and that is Mr. Theodore Edgecombe. And you will hear from him in this case. Just 2 days ago, we celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King. And I don't think anybody has said it is better than him as we talk about justice. And he said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So we are now embarked upon this search for justice, this search for the truth, this search for the facts. Mr. Edgecombe, at the time of September 22nd, 2020, was in possession of a firearm that he was temporarily restricted of based off of a bail order that he had in other cases. We want to go ahead and get that out at the beginning. That's a fact. You will not hear any dispute about that issue. Number two, Mr. Edgecombe on September 22nd did in fact punch Mr. Jason Cleereman. And that punch was as a result, and you'll learn in the evidence, was a result of racial slurs that came from Jason Cleereman. What the state has done is they've shown Jason Cleereman in the best light. They've showed Miss Evangelina Cleereman in the best light. They've also shown the Milwaukee Police Department in their actions in investigating this case in the best light. Well, members of the jury, here's the other side. Welcome to the dark side. Welcome to the side where a woman who is married to her husband for over 25 years, where she sees her husband laying on the ground, never tries to save his life, never tries to apply pressure to stop any bleeding. The evidence is going to show in this case she never administered CPR. She never took one physical act whatsoever to try to save the man she claims and purports to love. The evidence is going to show in this case that the same woman, the same wife, never even called 911 to try to save her husband's life. That's what the evidence is going to show. The evidence is going to show in this case that as he's riding his bicycle along, he was not coming in direct, going the opposite direction of the Cleeremans. He was riding his bike along. The Cleeremans, just leaving from drinking at a bar, operate the vehicle. They're going down the street, and there's a vehicle that's parked. There's a vehicle that's parked, ladies and gentlemen, that has their right turn signal on, waiting for a parking spot. Well, the Cleeremans grew impatient. So what did they do? They come over, and they go into the opposite lane of traffic, coming into direct contact with another vehicle. And then they swerve over, and that's when they struck Mr. Edgecombe. Mr. Edgecombe lands on top of another vehicle. And that's not the end of it. Pardon my language, members of the jury. They did not say, however, quote, as the state has argued, what the fuck? That's not what they said. The evidence is going to show in this case that the Cleeremans, well, specifically Jason Cleereman, yelled out, "Get the fuck out the road!" The evidence is going to show in this case a video of Mr. Edgecombe trying to evade the violent, aggression of the Cleeremans for 24 seconds. That's just on the video. That's what the video is going to show. That's what this case is about. That's what the case is about. The decision that Mr. Edgecombe made at a particular day, at a particular time, at a particular moment. You're going to learn Mr. Edgecombe describe Mr. Cleereman getting out that vehicle. You're going to learn Miss Cleereman yelling out the window as well. You're going to learn him getting out, not just going for a jog, as the state alleges. He wasn't just going for it. You're going to hear in evidence that Mr. Jason Cleereman was chasing Mr. Edgecombe, yelling out more racial slurs. "I'm getting ready to kill you. I'm getting ready to kill you. I'm getting ready to kill you now."
Defense attorney Anik Ahmad had presented a drastically different story to that claimed by Evangeline Cleereman. It painted Theodore as the victim and Jason's wife as a monster who had never attempted to save her husband. Milwaukee Police Detective Calvin was then called to the stand to ask about the knife found on Jason at the crime scene.
Does this have all the markings of everything that lets us know it's one of the items you inventoried?
Yes.
Okay. And opening up State's Exhibit number 33. We pull it out. Is that the knife that was found inside the pocket?
It is.
Okay. Your Honor, the state moves 33 in evidence.
Any objection?
No.
And just so the jury sees, was this the manner in which it was found inside the pocket?
It is.
Okay.
There was no evidence he had ever shown the weapon to Theodore, and from where it was located on his person, it was likely he had never attempted to use the weapon. However, it appeared that the defense was intent on making it known to the jury that Jason also possessed a deadly weapon. Next to be called to the stand would be Sarah Schreiber, the toxicologist that had analyzed Jason's blood samples from the night of the murder.
Now, could you tell us, Ms. Schreiber, what the BAC was of Mr. Cleereman that was analyzed?
The ethanol concentration in the blood was 0.121 grams per 100 milliliters.
Okay. And now I'm going to show you what's marked as Exhibit D17. recognize this document?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. Well, are you familiar with, as a toxicologist, are you familiar with dissipation rates and elimination rates of alcohol in human blood?
Yes, I am.
Okay, can you give us a general overview of that concept of dissipation?
When any substance is consumed in the body, it's the body's responsibility to remove that substance. This happens in various ways. When anything is consumed in the human body, it is the responsibility of the body to remove that substance from it. This happens in various ways. In speaking about ethanol consumption, depending upon or independent of route of administration, the body will work to eliminate that alcohol from the body. This happens over a period of time, and the alcohol concentration is primarily eliminated through the urine.
Okay, and are you familiar, so you're familiar with dissipation rates. What about absorption of alcohol?
The human body will absorb alcohol over the time period that it is consumed and will be absorbed into the blood, and it will then be eliminated from the body in that same fashion through the urine.
Okay, now, in your knowledge and experience as a toxicologist, do you understand what the, what the relation between the number of drinks someone may consume and their weight is?
Yes.
Okay, what is basically the relation between those two sets of data, let's say it that way?
So studies have been done in an effort to correlate the concentration or the number of drinks based on the concentration of ethanol in those drinks and factoring in an individual's weight to determine theoretically their blood alcohol concentration could be based on those two pieces of data.
Okay, so are you familiar with, generally speaking, the average person, if they were to consume one alcoholic beverage, let's say one beer, what sort of BAC would they be looking at on average?
It would depend on the size of the individual.
All right, so let's say hypothetically that individual is 250 pounds. Could you tell us what kind of BAC range they would be if they had consumed one drink?
It would be a low concentration, probably less than 0.01, definitely less than 0.02 based on that weight.
How many drinks approximately, according to the chart, would one need to consume to be a 0.12?
Between 7 and 8 drinks, according to this chart.
She would confirm that he had a blood alcohol content of 0.12 when he was ultimately shot. This line of questioning appeared to be aimed at discrediting Jason as a belligerent drunk. While the legal limit to drive a motor vehicle in Wisconsin and most states in the U.S. is 0.08, Jason wasn't driving. He didn't have to stay below a limit for any particular reason. But this could mean he may have been more aggressive than normal due to the alcohol consumption, which is the point the defense appeared to be trying to make. Evangeline had watched as a legal defense team had taken potshots at her husband, but it was now her time to take the stand and tell her side of the story.
Who drove to the bar?
Jason drove to the bar.
Okay. And when you guys decided to leave, who drove?
I drove.
How come you drove?
I drove because Jason asked me to drive. He said I'd rather be careful. He said I'm not drunk or I don't feel anything, but I'd rather be careful if you drove. That moment when I approached Brady Street, my husband said, it's a really nice day. Why don't you just take a right and drive down Brady Street?
Kind of scenic route.
A scenic route. Mm-hmm.
Were your windows up or down?
They were halfway down. Maybe a little bit less than halfway down.
So you're driving down Humboldt, you get to Brady. Which way do you turn?
I turn right on Humboldt onto Brady, so I'm heading west on Brady.
And While you're driving, do you encounter anybody on a bicycle?
Yes. I was driving down Brady. I remember I just had passed Tihanamusic. There's a restaurant on the north side of Brady. I just passed Tihanamusic, and all of a sudden, this bicyclist came out off the Marshall and Brady, came off of the sidewalk into my lane in front of my car, and so I swerved very quickly to avoid hitting him. So
did your husband, the victim, did he say anything at this moment?
Well, after I swerved and then went around him, my husband said, "What the heck?" He shouted out, "What the heck?"
Your husband makes a comment. What happens next?
So after that happened and my husband shouted out the window, "What the heck?" I kept driving and he's like, "Can you believe that?" I said, "No, I can't believe that." And I kept driving, and then the light turned red. And we were stopped at the red light in front of, I think it was Zaina's Pizza, or maybe it was the other restaurant. And then while we were sitting at the stoplight, the bicyclist came back to the vehicle, or approached the vehicle.
Now, I just want to stop you right there. You stated that you're stopped at a red light kind of by Zaina's Pizza, right? Mm-hmm. Is that a yes?
Yes.
It's okay. It's okay. Remember, the court reporter needs yeses and nos.
Yes.
Now, as you are at that intersection, that would be basically Brady and Holton, right?
Yes.
Okay. Kind of the bridge is off to your right?
So that's where Van Buren and Holton change.
Okay. Now, you indicated that a person on a bicycle then came up on and approached your vehicle on his bicycle. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. One thing I want to get into right now, were you ever able to identify who this bicyclist was?
No.
The bicyclist comes up. Does he come up on the driver's side or the passenger side of your vehicle?
On the passenger side.
And when the bicyclist comes up on the passenger side of your vehicle, does he stop or does he keep going?
He stops.
What happens?
He stops at the window and he looks at my husband and he says, "Were you talking to me?"
Does your husband say anything?
My husband looks up and he says, "Yes."
And then what happens?
And then the man on the bike violently punches my husband in the face.
Okay.
And then my husband's glasses, his head came towards my side, and then his glasses flew off of his face across me and then hit my window because it was partially up, and his glasses fell down into the well.
What did you do then?
At that moment, I was stunned. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand why this man on the bike came up to the car to punch him. You know, we didn't do anything. I just swerved around him. My husband said, "What the heck?" And then he comes up and he punches my husband. So all this is happening. I'm thinking, why did this happen? And at the same time, I'm trying to reach down to find my husband's glasses. And as I'm trying to do that, the light turns green, and then I start thinking, okay, I can't hold up traffic, so I need to start driving. So I start driving to go straight, to continue going the direction I was going originally.
You end up turning north.
Yes.
Why?
Well, as I was driving straight, Jason said, "Just turn the corner, I want to talk to him."
Anyone ever use the N-word during this?
No.
As your husband kind of gets to that area where the bicyclist is, what happens next?
So as my husband is approaching the bicyclist is, and he's looking at me, I'm looking at him, and he had these really dark, cold eyes, and he was staring at me.
And then what happens?
And then I see him pull up his hand, and then I see a gun in his hand.
And then what happens?
And then I shout out to my husband, he has a gun.
What happens?
My husband didn't hear me.
What's your husband do?
All I saw was this man's eyes and the gun. And then I knew he was going to shoot my husband. I could just feel it. And then he pulled the trigger on his head. And then he looked at me. He kept looking at me. Actually, he never took his eyes off of me. And I felt like he was contemplating on shooting me next.
So after your husband is shot, there's a pause. Is that what you're telling me?
There was a pause.
Okay. When you see this man shoot your husband, the victim, what does he do? What happens to your husband after the shot?
My husband dropped to the floor, to the ground. Instantly dropped.
Okay. And then there's this pause. Then what does the bicyclist do?
Just stares at me.
And then what?
And then I look to the right and I see that there's someone standing there to the right. And then I look back at him. And then he slowly turns, but maintaining eye contact with me. And then he walks over and he steps over my husband, and then he walks down the stairs with his bike.
The defense would work further on trying to discredit Evangeline as a witness and pulling Jason's character into question.
Mr. Edgecombe never made a threat to you, did he?
No.
He never made a verbal threat to you?
Never made a verbal threat to me.
Okay. He never mentioned at any time that he had a weapon on his person, correct?
We never exchanged words.
Okay. So Mr. Edgecombe never said, I have a gun, correct?
I never heard him speak a word to me, no.
Okay. And he never said that to Mr. Cleereman either, correct?
No.
And Mr. Edgecombe also never brandished a weapon. He never raised the shirt, showed a weapon. He never pulled anything out. Is that true?
I didn't. He was on his bike, he punched my husband, and he rode off.
Okay, I just want to kind of, before we go to that point, I want to just kind of stay right here at the time the punch was made. Mr. Edgecombe never displayed a firearm at that time that he punched Mr. Cleereman, did he?
I can't say because I didn't see his hands. I just saw that my husband was struck and his glasses flew off, and so.
The time would now come where Theodore Edgecombe would be called to the stand to recount his version of the events on that fateful night.
Mr. Edgecombe, what did you have planned for Tyler Grace on September 22nd of 2020?
I had daddy-daughter date night scheduled and planned with her, and which I still owe her. Shoot. My apologies. I had daddy. I had daddy-daughter date night scheduled with her. So I braced for impact. As I braced for impact, the vehicle just clips me, hits my pedal, hits my leg, and then also hits the handlebar, knocks me onto a parked car. He says, as he says,
You can say what he said, Mr. Edgecombe.
damn, drive, get the fuck out of the road. When I came up to the passenger window, I actually was, riding kind of fast, and as I gathered myself, riding pretty fast, headed to them. Came up to the passenger window and just asked him, hey, were you guys talking to me? And he said, yes, nigga, and I punched him. Ahmaud Arbery resonated in my mind because I'm like, these people are hunting me down now at this point. Now they're becoming more bold with what they're trying to do to me. So as far as like hunting me down, and even if, like I said, they didn't show any remorse then for hitting me, now I know, even if they didn't know that they had hit me, now I know that they're deliberately and intently trying to hit me now. I was escaping from being hit. As I got on the sidewalk, I was fearful, in fear of my life. I knew that these individuals were not, that they were deliberately trying to hit me. The reason I got on the curb is because I seen them heading towards me. And I'm thinking if I get on the sidewalk, they'll at least tear up their vehicle before they hit me. So that was my reasoning as to, jumping on the sidewalk in that instant, because they were headed directly towards me. They were so close, in fact, that I could feel the heat of the engine on my backside. And I just knew, I thought I knew I was gonna be killed. That was what was resonating in me. I was in fear, I was in shock, so I'm still just trying to get away from them. Upon him startling me and coming around that corner, I put my hand up and I told him, hey, stop, don't come closer. He told me, I'm gonna kill you. And upon him doing that, I heard Miss Cleereman yell out, he's got a gun. And yeah.
So just to be clear, at the time that you put your hand out saying, stop, don't come any closer, did you have a weapon brandished at this point?
Yes, I had my firearm, it was at waist level. I didn't have any intent. This gentleman actually took one large step and lunged toward me like he was gonna tackle me. And I took a step back. And as I stepped back, it was the reaction from that, the firearm just went off. And with him lunging towards me, I didn't know if he was going after the firearm, if he was coming after me or what, but I know from his words and his actions, his boisterous tone, he told me, I'm gonna kill you now.
The testimony given by Evangeline and Theodore was quite unremarkable. There was no real gotcha moment where any one piece of evidence would appear to sway the jury one way or the other. Because of this, it was anyone's guess as to what the final outcome of this case would be. The prosecution and defense would now give their closing arguments.
Frederick Douglass once said, in a composite nation like ours, as before the law, there should be no rich, no poor, no high, no low, no white, no black, but common country, common citizenship, equal rights, and a common destiny. And here we are, members of the jury, still embarked on that destiny. Mr. Edgecombe has accepted responsibility for his actions. We told you, He wasn't supposed to have a gun. He pled guilty to bail jumping. He took responsibility so that you guys wouldn't have to start your year off having to decide something that he needs to take responsibility for. He punched the guy. If he got charged with that, you're right. He should be charged with simple battery. He fled for 6 months. He provided his explanation for it. It wasn't because of what you've seen in that video. Any reasonable person would be fearful under those circumstances. Those are all true. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, those are not charges that Mr. Edgecombe is facing. The charges that's going to be on the form that you're given is going to be murder. And a whole different multitude of degrees of murder. You got to go through that. That's what's on your verdict form. And that's why you need to find him not guilty, because they have not proven this case. Mr. Edgecombe is no murderer. He's a very soft-spoken, scared individual. Mr. Edgecombe is no murderer. What he is, he's a survivor. He's a man who has already taken responsibility for any wrongs related to this incident. But today you decide, is he an imperfect person? The answer is yes, he's imperfect. But is he a violent, heartless, cold-blooded murderer? Absolutely not.
The jury would go to deliberate the case and decide their verdict. After 2 hours of deliberation, a request would come back to the court asking if they could view the footage of the murder again. Judge David Borowski would grant their request, but they were only allowed to view it one time and were not to ask any further questions about it. After several more hours of deliberation, the jury finally reached their verdict, and the judge would deliver it.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Theodore Edgecombe, guilty of first-degree reckless homicide, a lesser-included offense of count 1 of the information. Based on that, the jury was requested and asked to answer a second question: did the defendant commit the offense of first-degree reckless homicide while using a dangerous weapon? Answer: yes.
Theodore had asked for mercy from the court in sentencing him, claiming he was sorry for what he had done. But any thought of being spared leniency would quickly evaporate as Judge Borowski would deliver a scathing review of the case.
I don't want to hear excuses about his teenage years or anything. It's tragic, it's unfortunate, but you raised somebody that killed another person. This community's gone way too soft on thuggery, gangbanging, shootings. And that's all what this was. And for the victim's family, I can't imagine how hollow it is. It always makes me want to vomit when I hear defendants say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," as if they forgot to bring milk home at the end of the day, or, they didn't turn in their homework. This community has gone to hell. It is being ignored by virtually everyone. Our so-called mayoral candidates don't do a damn thing. The aldermen in this community don't do anything. The police, who don't have enough time to even keep track of the homicides, can't keep up with it. Is that what we've come to in this community?
While the judge seemed less than impressed with Theodore, he would not be given the maximum penalty at the request of the prosecution. Out of the possible 66 years he could have been sentenced to, Theodore Edgecombe would receive a 25-year sentence for the murder of Jason Cleereman, with a further 12 years of extended supervision. Borowski also ordered Edgecombe to pay $4,840 for Cleereman's funeral expenses. With all of the evidence considered, it was deemed that he had pulled the gun out, aimed it at Jason, and pulled the trigger, striking him almost directly between the eyes. If you found this case compelling, help us out by liking the video and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dive into shocking true crime cases. Channel memberships with extended perks such as members-only videos or early video releases are also available by hitting the join button. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.